Hello again, and welcome to the Gaming News Canada show. As always, I'm your host, Steve McAllister. As we prepare to say goodbye to July and hello to August, it got us thinking a little bit sadly about being on the back nine of the summer of 2024. That also got us thinking about September and the beginning of the fall fair season. Anyone who's been raised in a rural community, whether it's Canada or the United States, knows all about the midways, the crafts and baking competition, the horse, cow, and dog shows, beef on a bun, the demolition derbies, and of course, the tractor pulls. So for this episode, we're going to Kentucky for an overdue conversation with the Chief Executive Officer of Full Pull Entertainment, Chase Richardson. Hey, Chase, we spent some time together last year at the Global Gaming Expo in Las Vegas. Really enjoyed our conversation that night. I think it was an SBC reception. First off, I just want to say congratulations on what you've accomplished over the past 9 or 10 months now in building the Full Pull brand.
Yeah, Steve, thanks for having me on, and good to reconnect with you. We're not at a social with adult beverages. We're on a more formal podcast, so a little different setting, but good to reconnect. And yeah, it's this whole thing has been a journey, but it's been a very rewarding journey and one with a lot of stories. So, you know, even at the time I saw you in October, I didn't really know where this was going to be in terms of having a real money gaming product in market. But fortunately, we're about 4 weeks into it now, and it's going extremely well and been a pretty pleasant launch to this point.
Hey, Chase, when we were talking before we hit the record button about the value of networking, and when we met at G2E last year, that's exactly what you were doing. And I think it wasn't that long ago where you brought friend of Gaming News Canada, Benjie Cherniak, on board as an advisor. And a lighter note, I want to just ask you, first of all, how did you ever get Benjie near a tractor? I thought there was a great picture on LinkedIn of you and I think Ed Mode from Hot Paper Lantern, your public relations agency. But how in heavens did you ever get Benjie down to Tennessee and get him near a tractor?
Yeah, life was definitely a journey, and crossed paths at Benjie over 1.5 years ago, or maybe a little longer than that. And not only has he been an advisor and essentially helped us create what we've got to this point. He's been right there, as responsible for it as anything. But he's been a very good friend and been an awesome experience just bringing him into my life personally and obviously a business. So this whole concept or idea started 4 years ago. I don't have any gaming background at all. My extent of gaming background is I live about 30 minutes from Churchill Downs and been around horse racing my whole life. So that prior knowledge or consumer knowledge, if you want to call it, kind of like had my wheels turning and thinking about how could we ever do this for a sport that I love, the sport of truck and tractor pulling. And, it was a couple of years before I ever got to Benjie, and literally probably begged for a conversation, to be honest, just to put it honestly. And, one thing led to another, and he, as he became educated in our sport and, the unique big audience it does have in niche markets, his mind started turning, and one thing led to another. Now here we are in 2024 with a media company that does streaming of all the biggest tractor pulling events around the United States, and also a real money gaming platform that we operate as an operator. So it's funny how things work out. But Benjie himself, very humble, as you know, but without him, we would not be in this scenario at all. And I'm very quick to tell people that, and expect him to be a part of this all the way, till the end of time.
Yeah, and we've had the same experience with Benjie as an advisor and investor in Parlay Media Group, one of our early advisors, and maybe the first person, Benjie and Chris Grove, who we were connected with in the gambling industry. And again, just a great guy. He's been a great resource to what we built with Gaming News Canada, and we've had exactly the same experiences that you have. Your path to Full Pull is just a great story, and I want to get into that in a second. But for the audience here, and again, as I mentioned off the top, I mean, I grew up in a rural community. I live in a rural community now. I go to fall fairs every year, and it's funny when I lived just northwest of Toronto for 20 years, and the next door neighbor, we lived out in the country, next door neighbor trained Clydesdales, and Clydesdales pulling these great big cement blocks at fall fairs, and it was always neat to look out the back window on weekends and see them out there working out as horses. So I'm certainly very familiar with tractor pulls, but for the listeners in our audience who maybe don't know what a tractor pull is, maybe you can just explain that for them.
Yeah, it is a motor sport, and most typically when you think of motorsports, you think of who's the fastest or who has the best speed and time. And this sport is the only motorsport, at least that we know of, that speed and time are irrelevant. It doesn't matter how fast you go or the total time, in a typical racing format. It's who can pull a sled the furthest distance, and whoever accumulates that furthest distance is the winner. It's on a 350-foot track. Canada, I don't think y'all use feet as much, do you? Or do you? Do?
We're using meters up here.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, please forgive me for my lack of mathematical knowledge on meters, but it's a 350-foot track. Equivalent, similar to a football field, a little longer. And everyone's starting at 0 feet and pulling this sled in their mechanical vehicles, and whoever pulls it the furthest within that playing field wins the event. And then anyone that surpasses a certain footage, 350 foot typically is what's called a full pull. And then when you qualify for a pull off at that point, if there's a handful of competitors, there's more weight added to the sled that you're pulling, and they come back around for kind of a finals to determine winners or losers. So very unique. Kids often say this, as kids, we all grow up playing with our neighbors outside and we're racing and seeing who's the fastest from A to B. Well, not many people are pulling something to see who can pull it the furthest. So conceptually, that's something new to people that don't really know the sport, but it's very simple in terms of what you're trying to achieving and what the concept of the sport is. And, like Benjie himself, through all this education and being heavily involved for a very big operation in the pulling universe now. He went to his first event 2 weeks ago. We're outside Nashville, Tennessee, and when you get there and see it in person, it just gives a total different appreciation than me explaining it or even reading about it, because these are marvelous technology that these machines that these people are pulling. It's not a tractor that's out back on somebody's farm. These are sometimes seven-figure vehicles that are competing against one another. And like a lot of motorsports and even like skill sports, there's teams, there's engine strategies, there's setup strategies, there's skilled drivers. You can put a very good driver in a mediocre tractor and it significantly improves. So there's a ton of appreciation when you get into the sport about how good and how talented the people that make these vehicles are. But conceptually, the sport is very simple.
Hey, before we get into the betting piece of full pull, I just want you to. I'd like to ask you a little bit about your own personal path to this point, because as I mentioned off the top, it's a great story. I mean, you have a background in agriculture. We talked a lot about at G2E last year about your career as a basketball coach, and then starting full pull. I think less than a year into the COVID pandemic was a really gutsy move. So I just want to ask you, like, how did you get to this point?
Yeah, I'm almost like a vampire. I feel like I've lived like 3 or 4 lives, but yeah, it's by birth, I was born into the sport of truck and tractor pulling. As you mentioned, my family farms and have had a farm for over a century. And my grandfather was the one that got my father into the sport. I think my dad was pulling a tractor when he was 11 or 12 years old, at your rural county fairs at the time. And then obviously the sport has significantly grew through time. It's, a 75 plus year old sport. And so by birth, when I was born in this sport because my dad's been doing it since he was 11 or 12 years old. And, me personally, there's really been, if anyone that's a close friend of mine will kind of describe me as, the 2 things that I really, I'm an extremely competitive person by nature, but it's it kind of goes back to truck and tractor pulling, and then basketball. I was a basketball player, had a good, great career in my youth, and then how life takes you on journeys. I got into college Division I basketball coaching and did that for 10 years and had an extremely successful tenure doing it. Some of the best memories of my life. And it was, in fact, actually associate head coach at a very young age in that industry. And like a lot of people during COVID, some things, I took some time away from the normal lifestyle that coaching kind of throws you into, and came back home. Our family has a farm, as I mentioned, and a successful business, and spent a lot of time around there. And, that the late summer of 2020, I'd made the decision that I kind of wanted to phase out of coaching, to the surprise of a lot of people that were, my colleagues and people I worked with. And the other thing that kind of came to my mind during COVID, there was no sporting events, or very rare for sporting events taking place. And when you see these, during that time, there were a few sporting events with no fans taking place that you could bet on. And it was kind of like, well, if we're tractor pulling, you could bet on this, and maybe we could, be out tractor pulling during all this dead time. So a friend of mine had kind of brought to my attention, a year or so earlier, you should make this sport's so bettable. Like, why can't you bet on it? And then I literally, at that moment in my life, said, well, why don't we just look into this? I live in Kentucky. There's somebody from horse racing. Let's make this sport like horse racing, which little did I know that's not that easy. And, but it put me on this journey, as I mentioned, when I got out of coaching, along with working my family's business. During this time, I kind of just messed around with seeing what we could do to make this happen. And one thing led to another. As I said, it was it was a 4-year journey from the time that this idea came about to where it was actually a real product and market. So not every day you see a retired Division I basketball coach in the gaming business, because I guess I would consider myself retired at this point. But like I mentioned earlier, life puts you on journeys you don't expect, and you meet people like Benjie and a lot of great people in the gaming community, and I haven't had one regret about it at all at this point.
Hey Chase, as someone who's has spent their entire professional career in sports, whether it's as a journalist or a communications person, I'm always interested in kind of how the link between sports and business, and whether you're an athlete or a coach or an executive, how those lessons that you learn in the sports world translate into doing business. And I'm just curious, have you found the same thing, that you're, whether it was as a basketball player or later as a coach, how the lessons that you've learned has translated into building Full Pull?
Yeah, it's really funny you asked that. And by the way, you can see my picture here. That's a picture after we won a championship one of my years coaching. Went to NCAA tournament. I was fortunate to coach in 4 NCAA tournaments in 10 years, which is a good number I was at mid-major schools. But yeah, I have a ton. Some of my best friends in life literally came from basketball. Again, for 32 years of my life, that was a big part of who I was basketball related, and have a ton of friends that are still in that business, and I talk to on a daily or weekly basis. And that sport, as everyone knows, has changed. When I say that sport, Division I athletics has changed a lot. With the NIL and transfer portal changes the last handful of years, and I have a lot of guys always questioning, like, what's it like out there in the real world, as I call it, because it's so funny. Like when you're in that element, coaching and trying to win the next game and sign the next player, like you're not a normal human being at all. And I'm not saying there's a right or wrong way to live, but like the you don't really get outside of that element, because you can never take a day off, literally. And I will say this to answer your question. I have some other friends that kind of got out, or had different situations and stories, but everyone that I know that was in Division I college basketball coaching that decided to step away, and I can speak to this because I have real friends that done it, have all went and been ultra successful whatever they did. And I think a lot of it is because they're just you have to work so hard to be good at that job. And it's nothing, when you're coaching and you're recruiting, like you get to your office at 7 a.m. and then at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, you're making recruiting calls. Like you're working 15, 16-hour days. So if you just scale back to like 8 hours a day, you're probably doing more than a lot of other people in the general world. I'm not mean that as a knock on anyone, but coaches are very resilient. You get told no a lot in recruiting. Whenever I started this journey, I laugh about it, but I had a ton of people kind of just laugh at me, like, what are you talking about? Whenever I would try to schedule meetings and explain the sport and want to make it where it's bettable. And blah, blah, blah. I mean, I could write a book on some of those conversations and how it never really went well till I got to the point where I got in front of Benjie. So it definitely makes you resilient because you're never going to win every game. You're never going to sign every player. And I think those qualities are what really helps those people like myself and others that decide to get out, that be successful in whatever they do.
Yeah, and I think a couple other things about coaching too, Chase. It's being able to deal with people and knowing how to get along with people from all different walks of life. And then, coaching in a game is having the ability to react to situations and pivot. And again, in businesses, you have, if something's not working, you got to pivot and go down another path. So there's certainly a ton of similarities between coaching, regardless of the sport, and taking that into the business world.
For sure. And I'll say this, coaching this is Division I at basketball. I can't speak to other sports, but Division I basketball coaching, the coaching is easy. It's the easy part. Game planning and scouting and trying to figure out a way to win, like that stuff's very, it's the easiest part. The hardest part is recruiting. Navigating the recruiting process. I could write another book on just recruiting stories, and it's not as easy as just finding a good player. Like that's just the first step of a process of trying to get that kid to come to your school. And I can't imagine how much difficult it is now with NIL and people getting paid. And then there's that part, and then the other challenging part is managing these personalities when you get them there, which at the professional level, I think it's a little bit more transactional. When I say transactional, it's not much of a relationship factor, probably. I don't know this. I just can speak to my friends and people that, it's really just, it's business. Like we're there to do business. I don't need to know you. You don't need to know me. You do your job. If not, you get fired. But in Division I basketball coaching is simple. The recruiting and then the managing relationships and personalities is really, really where people earn their money, in my opinion.
Before we move on, the picture behind you, what team is that?
Yeah, so I was at Jacksonville State University. That was the place where I was associate coach my last 5 years of coaching. And we had an unbelievable run there. Went to 2 NCAA tournaments. It was the winningest 5 years in school history there, actually. So I definitely left at an interesting time. And the head coach that was there, he's still there. He's like family to me, him and his wife. I talk to him regularly. He's tried to get me to come back a number of times. He even says on record, but yeah, that was at Jacksonville State. I coached at Troy University as well for a year, then my alma mater, Western Kentucky University, for 4 years. So a lot of good memories, but I love being a fan and sitting back and watching and betting on it, just to be honest with you.
We saw, Chase, during COVID, that, to your point again about people, with most professional leagues shut down and NCAA sports shut down, that people were looking for other sports to bet on. And you look at table tennis as maybe the leading example there. And we're recording this interview on Tuesday morning, July 30th. And David Purdom, the excellent gambling industry writer for ESPN, had a tweet out this morning that just going to call it up here, that $15 million was bet on table tennis in Colorado in June, and that's a record for that sport in Colorado since Colorado launched legal sports betting back in 2020. And I'm thinking that may have been a bit of motivation when you see that there is room for niche sports and that there are people out there who want to bet on a sport like tractor pull. And I think we're seeing that with the Olympics right now, where if you're someone, a lot of us don't follow sports like rugby sevens or swimming, and that there is an opportunity for people to showcase their knowledge and make a few dollars betting on the summer Olympics. And then again, just as general sports fans, you want to bet on the athletes that you've been reading about leading up to the Paris Games. But I'm assuming that was part of your motivation for full pull was you saw that there was an appetite for people who wanted to bet on tractor pull.
Yeah, I think as I've learned and been in the industry now, I think there's definitely a big appetite for niche sports to make their sports bettable. It's a new emerging thing in our society. We're 6 months removed from 2018 pass the repeal, so everyone kind of is interested about that. The thing for me, though, I think kind of obviously I'm biased, but from the motorsports world standpoint, and there's documentation, articles, and information about NASCAR is probably the most recognizable motorsport, even F1 now. But those are very hard sports to bet on. You can bet on the end result, but the content, a race lasts 3 to 4 hours and doesn't have the same engaging appeal that like a lot of mainstream sports have, especially from a micro wagering standpoint. So motorsports overall, I think, is not that sexy for betting because it goes back to the speed and time, and things are happening so fast, and it's kind of hard for the user to follow. Our sport is very tailor-made for betting, to be honest with you, because one person goes at a time. There's a minute and a half, 2 minute break between each competitor, and it's very simple to follow. I mean, literally, there could be a day where you can bet on every single vehicle, an over and under, or however you want to. The possibilities are endless when it comes to the sport of truck and tractor pulling and making it from a gambling standpoint. And then also, with this sport itself, like when you go to these venues and like these fans obviously are fans of the sport, and you go in there, but like for years and since I was a kid, I always just remember like there's these pockets of people in all these venues that are just betting with their friends. Like, hey, what about this one? Like they'll bet a French fry, a beer, or $1 or whatever. So the bettability is already built in there with people. I mean, I guess you call it illegal wagering, but people have been betting on this stuff forever. It's really just a matter of making this where it's like a real thing that you can do from a regulatory standpoint. And so far, we launched a free-to-play platform last year just to kind of get some information in the appetite out there, and that people love it. I mean, they generally do, and I think a lot of it is obviously they're passionate about the sport, but it's also just so bettable naturally.
I moderated a panel at the Canadian Gaming Summit in June that included Greg Bloom, the CEO of BXB Extreme Fighting, and one of the questions we asked Greg on that panel was, just negotiating the regulatory environment and trying to get the sport recognized by sports books and making sure it's that they want to operate in a regulated betting environment. Like how has Full Pull gone down the same path and working to get your sports integrated into sports books and making sure that you're legal?
Yeah, so we're a real money DFS platform or skill gaming platform. So obviously you fall in a different category when you do that. And, we launched in 19 states initially, but some of our big states from a fan standpoint are pretty highly intense regulatory bodies when it comes to gaming. So literally for months, along not just a day or two, like back to, the fall of last year, and even before that, I believe, we were having conversations with the regulatory bodies, from a couple of these key states to tell them what we're wanting to do and, just kind of get the conversation going. And as we started to build our product out, we've literally had them be a part of it and kind of introduce step by step what we think we would like to do to make this, legal, and took their feedback and we've adapted and changed. But we've worked hand in hand with a couple of key states that we have to be live in just from our fan standpoint. And they've been very, willing and great to work with. And I couldn't say one ill word about the whole process. Sure, I want it at times to be done quicker than it's taken, but that's just kind of how the world works. So that's kind of the approach we've taken. We've been very upfront and transparent from the get-go, and keep fingers crossed. We should have our second license within the next week or so at a very significant state that we're really excited about.
Yeah. And Chase, if you can tell us, like, what are those key states? Like where's the bulk of your fan base right now?
Yeah, it's in Midwest U.S. Midwest United States is primary where a lot of the sports or a lot of truck and tractor pulling fans are. It does spread to Florida, Texas, California. So those are states that are in the unregulated market right now, but we're, operating in. So, it's Midwest U.S. and we hope to be at 21 states here pretty quickly. And then kind of, this sport primarily, the busy season of sport is June, July, August, and, midway through September, about the time football starts, to be honest. But there's also events that fall pretty well all the way to Thanksgiving, and then you kind of got some quiet time between Thanksgiving and the first of the year. Then January, February, and most of March, you have what are indoor or wintertime events. So we're going to try to elevate into new states and new markets kind of during once this busy season ends, and hopefully get in as many as 25 or 26 states for summer 2025.
You talked about content earlier. I mean, I would think you're just like Greg's trying to do with extreme fighting. You're trying to build the stars of your series, and you talk about live streaming. What are some of the things that you're doing to expand awareness and to grow your audience?
Yeah, so in our sport, there's been a group of people, call them influencers, that have done a really good job giving the sport exposure. I think 3 to 4 influencers with 1 million plus followers. So there is an appetite, and people do like watching this content. What we're trying to do is basically put all this general content in one area, with it being streaming and obviously the gamification of it to help grow the overall audience to new people eventually. Right now the sport has kind of been there's never really been a head count on how many people really tune in and watch this stuff, and how many people really follow it. So a big part of what we try to do with our streaming platform is, improve the stream, which we've done. It's a very high quality stream. It's fullpull.live. You can watch it in Canada. In fact, it's available on streaming devices and on our app as well on mobile devices. But try to improve the content and kind of put, some barriers around how many an audience and how many people are really watching this thing, to help, with other opportunities of sponsorships and bringing new people in and so forth. Because prior to all this, it was kind of just a lot of stuff out there, but it was never in one place. It's probably the best way I can explain it.
Right. Speaking of Canada, obviously, as I mentioned when we started the podcast, Ontario is, when you get to late August, there's fall fairs every weekend across the province. We have, as you know, we have a regulated gambling industry here. Alberta is going down that path, and we could have legal gambling in Alberta as soon as U.S. Thanksgiving in November. That's what some people have forecasted. But have you had discussions with people like Benjie and others about bringing business to Ontario?
Yeah, 100%. This is actually a worldwide sport, and believe it or not, in Europe, there's a big following for truck and tractor pulling. So, yeah, all that stuff is on our roadmap. And in Canada itself, as you mentioned, Ontario is probably the biggest province for truck and tractor pulling, if I'm not mistaken. So all of our plan is to emerge those markets, but we kind of get started where we are right now. Like I said, we've only been live for 4 weeks. To the general public. So 100%, I would anticipate us in Canadian and European markets sooner than later. Hopefully, can't put a date on it because we haven't really started that path yet, but that's definitely something we plan to do.
Hey, Chase, we just, when you're talking to a sports book about integrating your sport onto their platform, I think as we've seen in Ontario, a lot of these sports books are European based and obviously influenced by sports like soccer and basketball. I just wondered, are there any, I'm thinking there might be a great story or two about you meeting with a sports book for the first time and trying to explain tractor and truck pull and seeing a blank expression across the table.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you I haven't had those conversations either. Yeah, there's a ton of opportunity across the board, as you mentioned. Taking this outside the U.S., working with sports books directly. I think everything's on the table, but we're still really just getting started. So our biggest thing is to try to get our existing truck and tractor pulling audience captivated in one place, and then once we feel like we've done a really good job with that, I think everything's on the table in terms of partnerships and working with others. So that's kind of the high level roadmap of where we are right now.
Hey Chase, last question. What's the focus for you right now? Where is it you're spending most of your energy? I guess obviously, as you mentioned, it's a busy time of year for the full pull season, but what other priorities do you have?
Yeah, so our stream, I've talked very little about this stream on here, but our streaming platform was launched called June 1 or so on a subscription-based model. We've assembled a hell of a team of talented people that have really made this stream impressive, and by far and away the best stream that's ever been affiliated with the sport of truck and tractor pulling. And so kind of been helpful with them, but they've kind of taken that and run with it, and it's continuing to improve on a weekly basis. Outside of that, the gaming side of it, I stay pretty hands-on with, and we've created we have multiple types of gameplays now. So we just launched a new one last week that I think fans will really like, probably even more than our initial gameplay. So working with developers and our internal team to be smart, strategic about getting those games out and open. And we're going into new organizations and new events, probably, rather than just doing events on the weekends, we're probably doing one almost every day of the week now moving forward, at least for the next couple of months of some sort. So, and then obviously just working with, our partners to expand this, as I mentioned earlier, beyond the middle of September. We kind of want to make this a year-round platform and offering. So spending most of my time on that and giving support to all of our internal team we have currently. And I could probably ramble on and on what I'm doing right now, but doing that and not making sure we're getting in our licensing in the new markets, that's probably taking most of my time right now.
Sorry, Chase. Just one last question. Just in terms of people that you have working with you, like how big is your staff right now, and where is that expertise spread out?
Yeah, so on the streaming side, streaming/content, because we essentially a media content company now. We have 4 full-time people working for us that kind of, they're Swiss Army knife, as I call them. They do jack of all trades right now, but they kind of handle that side of the business. And me and I guess one other primarily right now are working on the the gaming side of it. And obviously we've been affiliated with groups and expertise in the gaming space that we work with and do a lot of the grunt work for us. And we just kind of serve as the voice, particularly with this licensing process. So
I think that's the key to content, Chase, is you have to have people who are nimble and like a Swiss Army knife. You can't put it any better than that.
Yeah, for sure. Whatever, they were all hired at some point as we were having conversations with them. They asked, when the question about job description was brought up, my answer normally was, I have no idea, but it's going to be a lot. But they've been awesome. And as like anything in this world, when you have a good team of people and people pulling the same rope, I really believe anything's achievable. So really excited about who we have involved with this.
Chase Richardson is the Chief Executive Officer of Full Pull Entertainment. You can find out more about Full Pull at fullpull.us. Chase, as I mentioned, it was long overdue to get you on the podcast. Enjoyed talking to you almost a year ago in Las Vegas. I'm great that we can catch up again. Wish you a lot of success with Full Pull, and maybe we will see you in Las Vegas again at G2E in October.
Yes, Steve. Thanks again. And as mentioned, our streaming platform is available, Full Pull Live. You can look at it on all Roku, Fire Stick, and streaming devices. Then also it's fullpull.live on any web domain browser. Then also on iOS and Google Play or Android devices, just under the title Full Pull is our app. On our app, our gaming platform and streaming both live. So definitely tune in and check it out.
Terrific. Thanks, Chase. That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show. As always, you can find this interview with Chase Richardson and our other podcasts at gamingnewscanada.ca. You can also find it on the various podcast platforms. Again, grateful to Chase Richardson from Full Pull Entertainment for joining us on the podcast this time. And we will see everybody again real soon.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you for listening to the Gaming News Canada show. Sign up for our newsletter at gamingnewscanada.ca. Follow Steve McAllister on LinkedIn. Message Steve if you're interested in being a sponsor or featured guest.